Well, my name is Lila, my first name, and I have a really long middle name. It's Nohea Kavala Ane. You want to try say it?
No, I don't.
It means lovely summer breeze in Hawaiian.
Wow.
And my last name is Uishiro. Yeah.
Awesome.
It's a difficult name to say, but
It's beautiful, though.
yeah. I didn't like it when I was a kid. I felt like it was different from everybody else, but I've grown to love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, where are you from?
So, if you can't tell by the name, I'm from Hawaii. I was born and raised on the Big Island, which is where they have the active volcanoes. And I also I'm raised on Oahu, which is like where all the tourists like to go. So I went back and forth on both islands.
Is it as nice as it seems in the pictures?
Yes, it is. It is. I miss it a lot. I miss the beaches. I miss the food. I miss being able to go from the mountain to the ocean within 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do miss it a lot.
That's awesome. Well, you can just start wherever you feel comfortable and just tell us your story.
So I was born in a town called Kona, and that's on the Big Island, like I was saying. My parents were very young when they had me. My mom was 16 and my dad was 20. When I was born, I was only 2.5 pounds.
Wow.
So from the very beginning, I feel like I was fighting to live.
Yeah. My
very first bed was a shoebox. That's how small I was.
Wow.
Yeah. They told me that I fit inside the palm of your hand, so I would like to joke around that I've been a handful since the very beginning. Yeah, so my parents, they were really young. They were still kids, still kids and still trying to figure out who they were. Mm-hmm. And so they were doing a lot of partying. And one day when I was 5 years old, my parents had been fighting over drugs. My dad had sent my mom out and she never came home and she had me with her. And so, as you can imagine, he was probably very upset for several reasons, taking me out, not coming home with anything. And they had been fighting and throwing rocks back and forth at each other. And while they were doing that, my dad had thrown one back at my mom and it had hit me in my right eye. Mm-hmm. And so what I remember from that day was like being shaken back and forth. And I don't know what that was, but then my mom carried me and running across the street, right where we had been living on the beach at the time, and not on the beach, but at a home on the beach. And there was a fire station across the street. So she took me straight there. And I remember crying because as she was going across the street, I had this whistle in my hand and it had fell on the ground and all I wanted was my whistle. And the whole time that there was lights flashing and I couldn't really see what was happening, but I just wanted my whistle for some reason. I don't know if it was a toy that I had just gotten, but I've always remembered that and I always thought it was weird.
Yeah.
But it's just the things that you remember when you're going through something. And they took me to the hospital and I remember doctors going in and out, and there was lots of eye charts. And I don't know if I had a concussion as well because I remember throwing up all over the place. And then the very next day, I remember waking up and looking in the mirror, and this whole side of my face had been bandaged. There was a patch over it. And I remember just staring into the mirror and not knowing what was happening. And then there was a knock on the door. And it was my mother, and she was there with the police officer. And I had been with my aunt. I was with my dad's sister, and she had told me to hide in the closet. And I could hear some voices talking outside. So I peeked through the window. I was looking through the window, and I could see my mom looking up at me while my aunt was saying that I wasn't there, that she couldn't take me. And I just remember feeling so heartbroken for my mom because even though she had her addiction, she was the type of mom that made everything fun. Mm-hmm. If we were sitting at the bus stop waiting for a bus, she made a game out of the cars passing by. She was always reading to me, always had me right there cooking with her. She really did love me. She just, had her own problems. And the next memory I have is of 2 police officers coming to pick me up And I had a younger sister at the time who was just a baby, and they took me to a foster home. And it was at nighttime, and I just remembered my first meal when I got to the foster home was alphabet soup. And I don't even know why I remember that, but it's a little detail that I remember. And I didn't like it there. It was, the family wasn't very loving like how my mom was. There was lots of other foster kids there. And there was another foster kid there that would climb onto me every night. At 5 years old, I had already thought that that kind of touching was okay because somebody had touched me before and I had told my parents and they did nothing. So I stayed in that foster home, I don't know how long. And then they put me into another foster home, and I think I was in foster care for several years. The second foster home that I was in, it was an older couple, and they were so loving. They were so sweet to me. I remember my first day of school, and for picture taking, like, she would dress me up in little dresses. She put flowers in my hair, and I just really felt love. And it was then, at 5 years old, I knew that I wanted to be a foster parent one day. God had put it on my heart. But my grandmother, my father's mom, had fought for me in court, and so she ended up getting custody of both my sister and I, and we went to go and live with her. And my grandmother, she was a hard lady. She had a nickname, Hard as Nails Nelly. Yeah, she was a tough one, and I know it was because of her upbringing. Now I understand it was because of her upbringing, the things that she had gone through. And she was tough on me, and she didn't like my mother. My mother was blonde hair, blue eyes. My grandmother, she was very prejudiced, and I didn't know that's what that was at the time.
Yeah.
All I knew was that she didn't like my mom, and anytime I had done something wrong, she would yell at me, "You're just like your mom. You're just like your mom."
Wow.
Yeah, and I remember one time I had gotten in trouble at school. I was a student that had to always sit next to the teacher because I was always talking too much. And I see now that it was because I just wanted attention.
Yeah.
I just wanted a motherly figure to just, nurture me. And so she called, and my grandmother got off the phone, and she cornered me in the hallway. And she just gave it to me. Back then, hangers were not made out of plastic. They were made out of wood. And she just laid into me, and the whole time she was just telling me how I was just like my mom. And at that moment, I decided to hate my mom in 5th grade. And I just felt so abandoned. I didn't understand. I knew my mom loved me, but why wasn't she there? Why was she letting my grandmother beat me? Couldn't she do something? And it wasn't until years later I found out that my father and my grandmother had told my mom, "Sign these papers. We don't need the court system involved, and you can see Lila whenever you want." But that didn't happen. It was always on my grandmother's terms because she had the control. And my mom wasn't living right, so, she didn't let me see her. It was very sporadic throughout the years that I got to see her. And I just started acting out. 7th grade came, there was a whole new sense of self and trying to find myself in 7th grade. I went from the small school to all the schools, everybody being in the same area. And so I started acting out. I started running away from home. And my grandmother, eventually, I ran away so much times that she just said she was done. I ended up losing my virginity at 12 years old. I had no self-worth. I just tried to find love whichever way that I could. And so at 13, I was sent to live with my mom again. By that time, she had gotten her life together. She was doing really well. And I was so proud of her that she got involved with a man that she got married, and he was abusive towards her. And everything just started crumbling all over again. So all I did growing up was seeing my mom be abused. On her wedding day, she had 2 black eyes that they had to cover up with makeup. And she still married him. I was the person that was holding her train, and when she was walking down the aisle, her train, I was holding onto it too tight and it came off. And she always joked around that was me trying to stop her from marrying him. But she married him, and like she had another baby. And my brother Kea, he's 14 years younger than me. And my mom and my stepdad, they started doing drugs again, and they were leaving him to be in my care. And while she was doing what she was doing, I was doing what I was doing. And I ended up getting pregnant.
At what age were you?
The first time was 14.
14.
Yeah, and I got pregnant by a man that was twice my age. He abused me, like to the point where he choked me until I stopped breathing. And he revived me, but I still went back to him. But I ended up like I finally got it in my head, okay, I might die. And so I did finally get away, and I ended up having an abortion at 14 years old. And that just caused me so much, like, I felt like I was gonna go to hell.
Yeah.
I felt like I was gonna go to hell, but I didn't change. I didn't change at all. I got pregnant again within a year. And this time I had met someone from high school whose father was a bishop, and he introduced me to God. I mean, I kind of knew about him, but I didn't really know about him.
Yeah.
And I learned some of the teachings, and so his parents actually had convinced me to put my son up for adoption. They said that I was too young, I was out of wedlock, my son would never receive any blessings because of, me being so young. And so they had convinced me, and I said yes. But then when I actually gave birth to Kyle, that's my son, I just felt like I couldn't do it. I gave birth to him through C-section. Mm-hmm. And after they took him and they showed him to me, I remember thinking like, wow, I was just so fascinated. He was so beautiful, but then I just knocked out because of the anesthesia. And then when I woke up, they asked me if I wanted to see him, and I told them no, I couldn't. And for 2 days, I prayed in that hospital, and I just asked God, like, what do I do? What do I do? And he spoke to me, and he told me that to keep him. So I did keep him. And I was back in the foster care system actually at that time. I had turned my mother in to CPS when I was pregnant. And so my brother had got taken away. He ended up being put up for adoption. And I was in the foster care system till I made 18. Mm-hmm. But once Kyle was born, I got on the right track. I just studied so hard in school. Like I went from like failing a grade to being like a 3.5 student, which was like big for me because I never really even cared. Like I had a purpose. I was somebody's mom, and I was not going to let my child have a mother who had not graduated from high school. Mm-hmm. So he was 2 years old when I walked the line. He was 2 years old. My senior year of high school, I was approached by the staff at the school, some teachers, and they had asked me to start sharing my testimony to younger students in the school. So I got to talk about like what it was like to be a teenage mom, and I just felt very empowered by that. Yeah. It was a big moment for me. I just felt like I was gonna do something good out of what, was meant, some people would look at as a setback. Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I got scholarships for college. I even got to have invited to the governor's mansion in Hawaii and have lunch and receive some scholarships. Wow. Yeah. I forgot about that for many years, but I was like, wow, like Lila, you really had opportunities given to you. But I had just been so tired of being under the state system that when I made 18, mm-hmm. I just kind of threw all that away. I only stayed 1 year in college. I wish that I pursued it, but I didn't. I just decided that I wanted to be free. Mm-hmm. And I had met somebody else who had 2 more children with 2 more sons. And I decided that we're just gonna start a family, when I really wished that I'd gone to school to become a teacher. That was my plan. I wanted to be a teacher.
Yeah. Which I could understand. At that point in your life, you had been through so many systems and everything. You want a moment to not be...
Right, to just breathe and just make my own decisions, not have to run it by somebody or...
Yeah. And then you're so young, and all your life, you know, that's kind of was normal in a sense, I could imagine. And then I could see where it would be easy to say, I just need a break.
Yes.
You know, I just need a minute.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I did, but that mindset was not good for me.
Yeah.
Because it went from a break to starting drugs. Mm-hmm. I wasn't an alcoholic at that time, but I just started doing drugs. It started off as like casually with friends, and then it just took off. And it was just because I had that addictive mentality, and I know it was because I also had 3 kids, and that was a lot.
Yeah.
To take care of 3 kids, and I just felt like I couldn't do it all, and that I needed that strength or that energy to get things done.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the beginning, I mean, and that's how drugs do it. It just tricks you into thinking that you need it. I remember when I first started, in 1 week, I painted every single room in my house a different color. And I look back now and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so crazy. And like, my kids must have been watching that. Like, what is going on with mom? You know, like the kitchen was red, the bathroom was blue, the bedroom was green. I don't even know where we got the paint from, but like everything was a different color. But I always still made time to play with them outside. Like, I was the mom that was like, let's go outside and play in the mud. Mm-hmm. If I knew there was going to be a meteor shower, I was going to wake them up and we're going to go outside on the blankets and we're going to watch the meteor showers. So I know it really hurt them when things started to go bad.
Yeah. So it started out with the drugs, just, it wasn't really an issue, just kind of here and there. And,
yes.
And when was the moment that you could tell, like it went from casual, no problems, to this is serious?
Well, so God knew my heart, right? Like I was saying, I wanted to be a teacher, and the opportunity opened up for me at my kids' school to work in the cafeteria as the lunch lady. And so I started off as a lunch lady to becoming a substitute inside the classrooms, to actually taking a parapro test, and which is an equivalent to associate's degree, and being a education assistant. So I got that opportunity to teach, and I knew it was a problem when I was calling into work every single Monday, or when I was going home during my lunch break to go and get high so I could finish out the rest of the day.
Yeah.
That was not a casual.
Yeah.
Yeah. That wasn't I remember somebody calling it a weekend warrior, somebody who just got high on the weekends but went back to work on Monday.
Yeah.
It just got out of control. It just started taking over our whole life. Having to go to food banks for food because there was no money left for food. And knowing that too, like, oh, I can go this place and that place to get what we need. Yeah, it was a big problem. And I did that for 13 years. For 13 years, I was a functioning addict.
Yeah.
Until my grandfather, my mom's father, had passed away. And it just, it tore me up. It tore me up. I wasn't able to be there because I couldn't pay for a ticket to go see him and still do drugs.
Yeah.
And so I just tried to tell myself that I'll make peace with it. You know, he knows my heart.
Yeah.
And my life just started to spiral out of control after that. It got so bad. And I remember him visiting me in a dream after he passed away. And in this dream, he was sitting down on his cooler in his driveway. And the way that the house was there was a driveway coming up one way, and then you could come back down the other. And he was sitting down on his cooler with his blue jeans and his blue work shirt, and he was just cars were coming past him and everything. He was just like waving to everybody. And then when it came to me, he said, it's time to come home. And at that time, I had been living on the other island on Oahu. And so for me, I felt like he was telling me to go back to Kona, to where I was born. And I was so unhappy with my kid's dad. So I told him that I just didn't want to do it anymore. I couldn't do our relationship anymore.
Was he using drugs as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so I took my 2 sons. My oldest son had already, had a child. He had moved to Florida. He was there with my grandson and his girlfriend. And so I had my 2 boys, and we moved to Kona, where my mother was. She had told me, she said, Lila, if you really want, to start over, you can come and live with me. At this time, my mom had done a 2-year recovery program. She had, gotten right. She had gotten her own piece of property. She was starting to rebuild her life. And so I went to go and live with her with my 2 sons. And the area that she had lived in was off the grid. Like, people lived with like solar panel lights. You had to haul your own water. Like, she was so smart. She had, in her house that she had built out of recycled wood that she had scavenged from burnt houses and stuff.
Yeah.
She had built her own house, and she had a car light hooked up to a what is that? An inverter that was running off of a generator. And that's how she lit her house.
Wow.
And not having to pay an electric bill except for gas every now and then.
Yeah.
Like, she was such a smart woman. She just learned how to live off the land. And so we went to go and live with her, and my kids weren't used to that. They're used to walking up to a wall and just flipping the switch and they have light, or, so they had to learn how to gather firewood to make a fire if they wanted hot water. I mean, it was just a whole different way of life. And I feel like now they're grateful for it because they've lived it. They know it. They know that they can survive. I don't know if they'd want to do it again, but
but still.
Yes.
Good to know.
Yeah. And so, but my mom and I, she was really bitter at me for turning her into CPS. And I was really bitter at her for the life that I had, She had popped in and out of my life throughout the years, and sometimes it was good, but every time that we had a conflict, I always would take it back to, well, you left me. How could you do that to me? I never did forgive her, and I could just imagine, how painful that was for her, for me to throw it in her face, not knowing the full story. All I saw was what I saw from a child's eyes. I didn't know what was going on in the adult world when it came to that. But my mom, she was really faithful in her prayers. Like, I remember her one night, like, she was still an alcoholic, and she drank a lot. And when she was angry, it would come out. But I remember her one night, she was screaming to Jesus on the top of her lungs. Like, she was like, Jesus, how loud do I have to yell? How loud do I have to speak to you for you to hear my prayers? Like, she just wanted her family back. She just wanted her daughter back. Like, I was to the point with my mom, like, yes, I lived with her, but I couldn't stand to be next to her. I couldn't hug her. The thought of it just made me cringe. Like, I just couldn't receive her love because I was so angry and I was still so bitter. But I remember, like, and I always think about it, and sometimes when I share my testimony, I talk about that moment when she was so angry with Jesus. Like, she's like, when are you going to answer my prayers? And I think, like, who would talk to Jesus that way? Who would raise their voice to Jesus? And I see it now as somebody who has a relationship with him. Someone who can go to him no matter what they're feeling. No matter if you feel ugly inside or if you feel good. Like, I knew that she had this relationship with him. And that's what does carry me around sometimes when I'm having a hard time and I don't know what to do. Like, I know that I can go to him with everything And it was because that moment when I saw her yelling at him.
Yeah.
And it, he heard her that day. He heard her that day. And we, somehow, things started to soften between us. And I started to forgive her. And I just started to just look at her as she was, not as the mother that she was before. We would sit up in her garden and we would read Daily Bread. Like, I never knew what that was before. I was like, daily bread? There's no bread here. I didn't know what it was. But she taught me what daily bread was and that how I needed it. And we would just sit in her garden and drink some cowboy coffee. I don't know if you know what that is. It's where you just boil the grains. And so you have like some inside your teeth after you're done drinking it. We would drink coffee and we'd read Daily Bread and we'd just watch the birds sing and we'd like point out those tomatoes that we're gonna fry up or, just whatever she had in her garden. And I'm just so grateful for that time. I'm so grateful for that time. And so I remember one night I was standing next to her and she was sitting down in the chair and she just leaned against my side. And I just wrapped my arms around her. And I remember just like running my fingers through her hair. That was the first time that I ever touched my mom's hair. And I can still remember what it feels like. And I'm just so grateful for that memory. So grateful for that memory. I know that God restored our relationship. I know. At that time, my kids, we had lived, like I told you, off the grid, so we were very far away from, like an hour and a half away from civilization where the schools were, and so they were missing a lot of school. And I decided that I was just going to homeschool them. And my mother had put on this movie called The Secret. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but
I don't think so.
It talks about the law of attraction and what we put out into the universe and like the power of our thoughts. And so at this time I had given my kid's dad another chance. I'm like, let's try again. Let's try again. And he came to the outer island to stay with us. And we took the kids out of school and we said that we were going to go on a backpacking trip around the island. We had some waterfalls that we wanted to go visit, some warm water ponds, but we also wanted to find my sister who had been missing. We didn't know where she was. She was living on the streets with her young baby who was like under a year old. And we also wanted to find my grandfather, my dad's dad, that we had never met before. All we knew was that he lived on the top of a mountain. So we had watched this movie, and like me, my two sons, and my niece who had been there, and my kid's dad, we just started, I would call it praying, but just putting our thoughts and like, we're gonna do this. We're gonna find my sister. We're gonna find my nephew. We're gonna find my grandpa. And so we just, with complete faith, with like $200 in our pocket, we went around the island. We jumped on the bus and we went to the other side of the island. And we knew the town that my sister was in, but we didn't know where. And so we set up at a golf course. We were gonna just camp out on the golf course. Everybody was gone for the day, so we just set up. And while I was in the tent, I see it look across the street, and they're sitting at a park and they're watching me. And these two police pull up, and I'm like, oh my God, they know that we're here. They're gonna arrest me. But they really had just pulled over on the side, so I could hear my kids laughing because they think that I'm in the tent and I'm scared and I think the cops are gonna come and get me. And as that happens, my sister comes walking up with the baby, pushing the baby.
To your tent?
No, across the street to where I was at. So right away, the first thing that we had wanted to do, God made happen. We found my sister.
Wow.
So that just like psyched them up. They're like, okay, let's do this. And so we spent a couple nights like on the beach, on the golf course. But by the third night, they're like, Mom, man, this sucks. Like my body is hurting sleeping on the ground. So we sat in a hotel lobby that was in that area, and they started praying. My two sons and my niece, they sat around the table and they started praying. And I promise you, the hotel clerk, she said, what are you guys doing? And we just told them what we were doing. We're taking our kids around the island. And she said, hold on a second. And there was a hotel room that had just been remodeled that nobody was staying in. And we got to stay there for a couple nights.
Wow.
Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so my kids, their minds were just blown. They're like, wow, this really works.
Yeah.
This really works. And we had been down to like maybe our last $20. And we were sitting at a bus stop getting ready to go and try and find my grandpa. And so this man who's jogging in the area, he sees us all sitting there. And I'm sure we probably looked like, I don't know, we had all our bags and our kids. We didn't know what was happening. And he stopped and he asked what was going on. And we told him what we were doing. We're taking them around the island. And he just pulls out $100 bill and gives us $100 bill.
Wow.
So even more, my kids are like,
yeah.
Yes. And so like, it was amazing. It was amazing to see what was happening. And like, I know my children, we still talk about it, my niece, and I know they'll never forget that. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the trip, we got on the bus and it said, okay, we're going to go find Grandpa. So we go to where we know that he's at. And then I find out, I'm thinking that we can just walk to his place from where the bus stop is. I find out that mountain that he lives on is 7 miles up. And we are just tired and we're beat from our trip. And they're like, I don't know if we can do it. So I just walk up to this lady who's got a pickup truck. And I'm like, hey, I'm trying to find my grandpa. I know he lives on the top of this mountain. Can you help us? And so she said, yeah. And we jump in her truck. She drives us to the very top. And then I tell her to stop. And I open up the mailbox and it has my last name, Louis Sherrill. And so we go in, and we walk up to his house. I knock on the door and I'm like, hi, Grandpa, I'm your granddaughter with all these kids and bags. And he was just like.
And you've never met him before?
No. And so he was in shock at first. And then I said, I'm Blaine's daughter, and so he let us stay. But he lived on 40 acres on top of the very top of the mountain. It was so beautiful. The name of the area was called Coloco Cloud Forest. So like you would stand outside and you could just see clouds, like you're above the clouds. You were looking down at airplanes.
Yeah.
It was so beautiful. And he had all kind of fruit trees and exotic flowers. It really felt like heaven being up there. And so he invited us to stay, and he was older. And so he asked if we wanted to live there and help him out on the property and stuff. And I was just like, yes, I want to know my grandpa.
Yeah.
And so he said, hey, why don't you call your mom? And so I called my mom and I told her that I'm going to go live with Grandpa. And she gave me her blessing. She was so happy. And so we started talking about, all the great things that were going to happen this year. Because I told her about our trip, everything that happened. And her mind was just blown too. And then she was like, we're going to find your brother, the one that was put up for adoption. I just know it. Everything's going to happen. And I left her and I went to go stay with my grandpa. And then he told me, hey, why don't you call your mom and let her know, why don't you tell her to come up and spend some time up here? So I called her and there was no answer. And then I called again, no answer. And then my dad calls me, and when I went to go live with my mom, her and my dad started talking again. And so he was over there visiting her, and then he called me and he said, Lila, your mom is dead. I had just seen her like 2 days ago. He said, she's dead. He said, I don't know what happened, but she's gone. I just fell to the ground. I couldn't believe it. Like I finally had my mom back. Mm-hmm. It was so hard. And when I was a kid and I didn't know where my mom was, I remember thinking like all the time, like, is she dead or is she gonna die? And when she does die, like, I'm gonna be the one who has to take care of it. I'm gonna have to, make her funeral and all of this stuff. And I didn't even know what to do. And so my grandpa, we immediately got in the car and we drove there, which is like 2.5 hours away. And right when I got there, my dad was there waiting, and the coroner had gotten there. And he told me to not go in the house. He said, don't look at her. I don't want you to see your mom that way. Later on, it said that her heart had just given out from all the years of the drugs and smoking and all of that. And as the car pulled out, there was hundreds and hundreds of white butterflies just flying all over the place. And all the 10 months that I had lived with her, I'd never seen that happen. And I just knew it was her. She was gone. And then my dad, he jumped in the car with my grandpa and he left too. I really thought that I could rely on him, but he was gone too. So I stayed there, and I was the person who had to call every single one of my siblings, call her mother, call her of her other father, call her sisters, and tell everybody. And it was so sickening having to tell that same story over and over again, that she's dead. And then hearing the cry and the screams. That night, I went straight to the store and I got me a bottle of vodka. I couldn't deal with it. And I never did put down the bottle after that. Not until I got sober. So dealing with I got back on drugs when I went to live with my mom, and then having alcohol addiction, and then my heart broken, and I just couldn't do it. I tried. I couldn't do it. I couldn't take care of my kids. I couldn't deal with their dad. After 17 years, I said, finally, like, it's done. I am done. I'm done with everything. And I left him and my kids. I didn't want to have nothing to do. I just couldn't. I couldn't cope. I couldn't even take care of myself. And I felt so selfish. But I also knew, like, the enemy was just trying to just take me down. He's telling me, you don't have to be a mom. You've done this, you've done that. Just take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And so it got really bad. I mean, to the point where, like, I don't even remember a lot of stuff because I was just so intoxicated. So intoxicated.
Which prior to this, you had just started to kind of understand God and prayer and things like that, right?
Yes.
And then that happened, so it's
not a coincidence. I mean, I know that's the enemy.
Yeah.
And it was just, my family is so powerful when we're together. We're a powerhouse. And I just felt like the enemy was scared, and he just tried to just have us self-destruct, and through me.
Yeah.
And my kids were teenagers at the time. My grandfather let me stay there with him. And it was good for a while. And then my older son, Kyle, came back to Hawaii from Florida to live with us. And it was, I wanted it so bad, but it wasn't a good time. Because I was not well.
Yeah.
I was not well. There was lots of fighting. And then living with my grandpa, I understood why my dad was the way that he was. He was very vindictive, very deceitful. It's almost like he tried to pin family member against each other. And I don't know if he was going into dementia or what was happening. But my grandfather had some kind of mental illness. I truly believe now. And I started to understand my father a lot more. And after my mom died, I swear, like everything that she had gone through in her life, I was starting to go through. I let my kids go and live with their father's mom, with the promise of me going into rehab. And I did. It was an outpatient rehab, so it really wasn't the kind of care that I needed. I still thought that I could do a lot of things in my own strength, and it was a secular rehab, and so like it really wasn't fixing anything on the inside.
Yeah.
I stayed there for several months, and while I was there was these. I went and stayed in another rehab, like lived there, like I don't know, what do you call that? Where you just go and stay there. You live there. It's some kind of housing that they have for people that are. I can't think of the word.
I know what you're talking about. I can't think of it either, but it'll come to us.
So I was staying there and then going to the outpatient treatment. And while I was in that program, it was run out of a church. So I was having God in my life again, going to church every Sunday. There was these two girls that were my roommate, and they tested positive for drugs. And so because of that, they wanted to make everybody test positive for drugs. And so they put some drugs in the coffee, and they had told me about it. And this home had like women and children in there. And like, I felt convicted. I knew what was going on. I didn't do anything in the beginning, but I went downstairs and I dumped the coffee out, but some people had already drank it. And they were getting sick at church. So I told the director, and he immediately said that they're out of the program. He didn't let them back onto property. He had me stay at the church so I didn't have to see them. And he had somebody go and give them their belongings. And the belongings that they gave him was a suitcase that was mine because I had been in the same room with them. And in that suitcase was my mom's ashes that I never got back. That I never got back. I was able to spread her ashes, but my family's plan was that we were going to keep some, and wherever we traveled to, we were going to spread a little bit there, spread a little bit here. And I lost it, and I just felt so horrible. I had lost her again. And I left. I can't even remember where I went because I relapsed. And I left, and I broke my word to my mother-in-law that I was going to stay and get treatment. And for years, I don't even remember. Just spiraled. I know I was already drinking that night as soon as I left. Drinking for several months, and somehow I was island hopping. I was going from one place to the next place, and I had ended up in that same town that I had found my sister at. And I was at one of the hotels, and I was walking out after I just met up with somebody. After he got what he wanted, he left, and I was just felt more worse. So I was just drinking myself almost into a coma. But for some reason, I walked out onto the balcony. And out on the balcony, I looked up, and all I seen was this body going over the edge. And I just heard, like, he hit the car, and he was on the ground.
Ooh, word.
And I just watched, like, people were all coming out of their doors, and everybody was just staring, like nobody was doing nothing. And so I'm so glad that I immediately, like, I called 911 and I told them what I had just witnessed. But after that, I don't even remember the next few days. In fact, one of my friends had called me missing because nobody had heard from me. They didn't know what happened. I had been staying at a friend's house, and the police came and they did a wellness check and told me that somebody had reported me missing. And I remember looking online, and my picture was on Facebook, like my kids seen it, like their mother was missing. Like it was just so embarrassing. And so I tried, the person that had reported me missing, he said that there was a program on a different island on Maui that I could probably get into. And so he said, he helped me get to that island, and I went there. There was no openings. So I had to just stay on the streets for a couple of days until they could get me in. And so what I did was call the crisis center over there. And the person who was assigned to my case, I had told him what had happened to me, that I had witnessed somebody dying, jumping off the building. And his mind was blown away because the person that had assigned to me, he knew the father of the guy that had jumped. Like, what are the odds?
Yeah.
What are the odds? And so because he knew what trauma I had been through, he tried very hard to get me into that program. And I was able to go in. It was, they were Christian. We did go to church and stuff like that, but it wasn't like fully, like it would just go to church on Wednesdays and Sundays. And I'd gone to this one church service, and I had been going, and I just remembered just singing on the top of my lungs to God. Like, I'm not a great singer, but I will sing. You know, it brings me joy. Mm-hmm. And I remember I would always finish my prayers, because I started to pray a lot then, that God, I am so in love with you. I don't just love you, I'm in love with you. And the pastor was talking, and then he stopped and he pointed at me and he said, do you know how much God loves it when you sing to him? And I had just been having that thought in my head. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was just like this confirmation, like, God, you do hear me. You do hear my prayers. You do hear my cries. And then he said, he wants you to know that he's so in love with you too. And I was like, that was specific. For me, that was a specific detail that told me that God is really there for me, that he's listening. And so I continued to go to these church services. And then one day they had a prophetic speaker, mm-hmm. where they call people up and they prophesize mm-hmm. over their life. And so I had my roommate with me, and she didn't believe in God. She didn't believe in God, but she still went to the service because she just wanted to get out of rehab, out for the night. And so while there, we walk into this big white tent, all these chairs are all set up, and we go to the front row. And so I'm sitting there, and I can just feel her energy, and she's just, she doesn't believe, but she wants to believe. Mm-hmm. And so I just start praying for her to be picked. And so they pick up about maybe 10 people, and she's one of them. And I'm just like, thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. And he's done picking. And then I'm like, please, Lord, I need a word too. I want to go up too. And then after the speaker had picked everybody, he called me up too. And so I was kind of like at the end of the thing, and he was like going through each person, and he was like talking about the problems in their marriage, or, you know, what you need to do. You need to surrender. And he goes to her, he lifts her hand, says, you need to believe. And then he stops at me, and he tells me, you are already healed. He said, you are like the woman at the well. You're going to bring people closer to God. And you are already healed.
Wow.
And to this day, like, anytime that I'm feeling doubtful, mm-hmm. I remember that moment that I'm already healed and I just need to walk in it. But back then I didn't believe it. Mm-hmm. And like, that's the key to unlocking it too, is that you need to believe it. Mm-hmm. But back then I didn't. And I completed that program. But within 1 week of leaving the program, I got into a relationship and relapsed again, which just led me right back down to the same road.